Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Chrissy Raywalk, Director of Intercollegiate Athletics at the University of Delaware. One of the things that I appreciate and enjoy most about leadership is that it is a journey, not a destination. It involves lots of different twists and turns, and you need many different types of people to go along with you on your journey in order for it to be successful. So today, I invite you to start your leadership journey with this podcast. Enjoy.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Brad Bates. Brad is the Vice President for Consulting at Collegiate Sports Associates. Greetings, Brad. Thanks for joining us.
Ty, thanks for the opportunity and thank you for your leadership in providing this valuable resource.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. Now, Brad, you have extensive experience, almost 40 years in college athletics. Of course, before joining Collegiate Sports Associates, you were Director of Athletics at Boston College. Prior to that, Director of Athletics at Miami of Ohio. Of course, you began your career as a graduate assistant with football. So, wanted to be a coach and found yourself in administration, well respected in the industry. So I'm kind of excited to have you here, specifically because of the topic I want to talk about.
Well, don't get too excited. It's a dangerous pathway. I'm really honored to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'll say this, Brad. I've known you for a while. I mentioned back when I used to volunteer for Dutch. I think you were at Miami, Ohio at the time when I had an old podcast with the American Football Coaches Association called the 2-Minute Warning. You were one of the first guests talking about hiring coaches. Of course, we have a commonality. We were both big fans of Bob Marley and tried to make that connection through the years. So I think it's important.
I still have a famous CD that was sent to me by you.
Hey, that CD, that's not easy to come by now. It's a whole rehearsal CD.
It's
It's not easy to find. I think I bought that, ordered it, and it came over from Japan or something like that. So
yeah, it's a great album.
Well, the reason I have you on, because obviously we're here in this pandemic chapter of American history. And at the point of the year where we are, a lot of people in college athletics are talking about what happens if there is no football season. And that has major implications across the country in terms of college athletics, even professional sports and everything. I guess a lot of things are tied to college athletics. And, you see a lot of things in the media now. And I guess as ADs try to wrap their minds around the rest of the year, they're probably mapping out strategies for a number of scenarios. And I guess someone who has been in the chair and who still works closely in terms of consulting, I wonder, what do you think some of the leaders in college athletics are strategizing for the scenario where the college football season doesn't happen? And really, is there a drop dead date? I saw somewhere where the AD at Notre Dame was June 1st. You got to have a date where everybody's okay, let's go into full-time mode and preparing. Just what's on the mind of our leaders in college athletics?
Yeah, great question. And obviously everyone's talking about this. Hey, you got to remember, athletic directors are professional risk managers. They're hired to anticipate scenarios and plan accordingly. Now, no one anticipated this arriving. And so they're kind of making it up as they go. They have to. So right now they're gathering as much information as they can. They're studying related research, if there's any related to it. And there are some scenarios. They're developing options, and depending on the evolving circumstances, and we know they are evolving, they'll be making and communicating logical decisions. Some ADs have already done that. Now, what does that look like? They're working with their CFOs, designing a variety of business models, and the models range from having fall football and on-campus learning to no football, delayed basketball, and remote learning. Because remote learning has an impact on the entire university as well. And as you said earlier, they have to be looking at all the possibilities. And the breadth of possibilities right now are really extensive and vast.
They are. What I understand, and I'm sure you'll educate me on whatever lack of knowledge I have in terms of how a college athletics department brings in revenue, right? There's conference distribution from media rights, right? Fundraising, right? And as you mentioned before we started, either philanthropic or transactional. I want to donate money just because I want to donate, or I donate money so I can get a better seat at the football or basketball games. Of course, there's ticket sales, people coming to live events on campus. And then some schools, depending on the size or the setup at the school, they get campus aid, right? Whether that be in the form of student fees or however it's set up on campus. And it seems like a number of those can possibly be affected if there isn't football. But one of them, the campus aid for the smaller schools, I mean, will universities charge student fees if the students are doing distance learning, if they're not on campus, and they're not using the facilities, not using the campus recreation, or not going to athletic contests? Is there a necessity to charge student fees for students? And if that happens, that is a big effect initially on the schools that depend on that campus aid, I imagine.
Yeah, so you just laid out a lot of different possibilities as well as questions. Things, right? So let's sort of start it from here. USA Today does an annual report, and pretty much every year, the range of public school athletic departments that make a profit is only about 14 to 24. So you have well over 300 Division I athletic departments who are reliant on their universities to subsidize their budgets. And as you pointed out, Ty, with remote learning, these same universities will see a significant reduction, not only in student fees, but think of the lost auxiliary revenues, such as room and board, or bookstore operations and other entities. This is all happening at a time when FBS university budgets have increased only 12% since fiscal year 13, while, for example, football spending has increased 35% in that same period of time. So many universities, as you're pointing out, many university athletic departments, the university was struggling to subsidize their athletic programs before declining enrollment and remote learning. Now you've added this to the formula, and it really is, it's going to be very difficult to make ends meet.
Like, that seems like a huge concern, because I think if you look at data, I mean, the variety of percentages of aid that comes from campuses for schools, like, range is, what did you say? I think you had some data in front of you that said the range was from 0 to.
Yeah, so in one of the group of 5 conferences, and it really has to do, student fees are really a matter of accounting practices on the university. So what schools, when they're subsidizing an athletic department's budget, they really often just, it's a byproduct of where they want to designate the money's coming from. In some schools, particularly group of 5 schools or D2 and D3 schools, they'll identify it from student fees. At other institutions, it'll just be from the general fund. So in one group of 5 conference, the range in student fee supplementation is 0 to $17.7 million. And that 17 million represents almost 50% of that particular athletic department's budget. So again, most universities are subsidizing their athletic departments at some point. The range and the percent of the athletic department budget that they're subsidizing can be pretty significant. And so back to your point, if you don't have on-campus learning, if everything's remote, suddenly the university is struggling financially to make a balanced budget. So they're going to struggle as a university, let alone trying to help all their various units, such as athletics.
Right. So thinking about 14 to 25 schools that don't depend on campus and probably have big reserves or bring in a whole bunch of money and cover the whole athletics department. Let's say they have a big reserve of money. So football doesn't happen. Obviously, it's going to hurt, but we have a big reserve of money. You can probably think that way. But what about the scenario where, okay, the school is struggling because of all those things you said. The school probably has its reserve, but it's struggling because students may not be on campus. So all the various variety of ways that students on campus benefits a college campus isn't happening. Does a university go to athletics like, hey, any reserve money on any department on campus, we need it with us on campus and not necessarily with athletics or with each individual department who may have some reserve? Like, is that a possibility where those big schools have to send the money they set aside over to campus because campus needs it?
Yeah, well, there are a few schools already doing that. So university budgets count on transfers from the athletic departments. And as you said, it's coming from those few that make a profit. So the university is reliant on athletics, again, at just a small number of schools to help make their revenue streams. And so if athletics goes without a football season, that's going to cut further in their reduced revenues.
Yeah. Hey, that's a situation there, right? That's a big situation,
yeah.
It seems like.
And so really the commonality of this is is going to impact everybody, whether you have a large budget or not, whether you're highly subsidized by the institution, or whether you're a Power 5 program that's selling out every football and basketball game. It's going to impact everybody if there's no football season.
If there's no football season, right? Now, I saw Jack Swarbrick from Notre Dame, and I've seen a couple other people say, there has to be some date where we decide. We can't linger. We can't have an ongoing lingering situation where we're racking our brains. Like at some point, we have to either from Dr. Hainline, who's dependent on Dr. Fauci, wherever the leadership chain is in terms of health and wellness of the people in America, right? Which then means the people on campuses and down the chain, there has to be some kind of data. You think about football coaches, they're like, hey, you have to get in shape to be able to come into camp, right? And then camp helps you get in shape for the season. Like there's a logical step, and from working with coaches, Coach Beckler up there, you know how important it is to have the time to work on things. And so I just wonder about that part of it. I probably need to talk to some coaches about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you're right. You're seeing different coaches and different athletic directors pinpoint different dates depending on their perspective. I would take a step back before I even engaged the athletic department deadlines. Everything I'm reading says that the earliest estimates for having a vaccine are 12 to 18 months. Johnson & Johnson just came out, I think, last week and said they're going to begin testing in September. But in order to get approval, those tests are going to take several months. So it doesn't look like we're going to have a vaccine this year. So eventually our medical and political leaders will have to clearly define where that tipping point is between risk management without a vaccine and the economics of our country, right? Now, you take that micro perspective, university presidents are going to have to decide whether they are comfortable bringing students back to campus this fall without a vaccine, or even next spring potentially. If the answer is no, how do you rationalize bringing student athletes back to campus from all over the world without a vaccine? And if the answer is yes, will mom and dad be comfortable sending their children back to school without a vaccine? Let alone will fans be comfortable sitting next to 60,000 people in a football stadium, right? So ultimately, if the percent of people likely to get the virus after stay-at-home and social distancing guidelines are relaxed, if that percent of people likely to get the virus is sufficiently low to give university presidents, ADs, coaches, mom and dad, fans comfort, then colleges will be back in business. But imagine the university president or AD who has a student athlete get the virus after returning to school. And so I think that's the dilemma they're faced with.
Yeah, because that one case, that one scenario, one student athlete getting the virus immediately will probably shut down the rest of college athletics. So why you take that risk in the front?
Yeah, and without a vaccine, it's probably a likely scenario that it's going to happen.
That's the truth. And I wonder about the vaccine because, you think that the 12 to 18 month is based on the normal premise of operating how things usually operate. But I think all normal premises are probably out the water. So they probably speed the vaccine up. And then are there repercussions of speeding up some type of vaccine? And that can get into a whole different discussion right there.
Well, back to your original question about what ADs are doing right now, they're developing models requiring all possible scenarios. And here's where it gets tough and personal. In the models requiring expense reductions, ADs have to engage in the arduous and emotional problem of prioritizing their human and financial resources, right? In other words, they got to rank staff value relative to the athletic department mission, who is essential. And from those rankings and who's essential, they've got to balance their budget. So within each model, football or no football, basketball, no basketball, remote learning, on-campus learning, they've got to have a plan that balances the budgets. The other thing the ADs are doing, though, and they're not alone in this, they're working with their conference and NCAA leaders to examine any and all options. So let's take, if we don't have football in the fall, can we do it in the spring? Can we organize a schedule and work with our media partners to maximize revenues at a time when, March Madness is going to take place if football is taking place? You don't want to conflict with the NFL, with Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL. And so how do you set up a schedule that's going to be navigating in a way that maximizes revenues for everyone and it's safe for the student athletes? The great thing and with a focus on leadership, anyone can lead when everything is going well. The real leadership emerges during times of great adversity. And clearly, this is one of those times.
It is. And one thing you mentioned, I don't know if this is a part of a conversation or not, but if you move the sport of football to the spring, do you sacrifice the regular winter and spring sports? And if you sacrifice the regular winter and spring sports, do you start talking about Title IX problems? I mean, the depth of issues that can come into not having a football season, just as you start racking your brain and think about the layers. I wonder about like conference, the commissioners are probably racking their brains, right? What happens if there's no football, and the media companies, which are already reeling, trying to put on content, at some point, does their distribution of revenue change?
Yeah, it sounds like most of the conferences are having regularly scheduled conference calls and webinars with their athletics leadership and university leaders. So again, I think collectively they're all developing models under the various scenarios. The two problems they have right now is they don't know the answers. They can anticipate possibilities, but they don't know the answers. And the second problem is their decisions are reliant on medical and government leaders making their decisions first. And once those decisions are made, then they can start applying the modeling that they're doing right now.
That they're doing. I have one last question for you, Brad. This has been an excellent conversation, very educational for me, but it's relative to coaches contracts. If revenue isn't coming in, can I justify paying 6 or 7 figures for a season that may not happen? I mean, is there ever a point where a department or they file, is there a bankruptcy? Like, we can't pay for the facilities we've been paying for, the debt service. We can't pay these coaches for things they aren't doing. Like, do we need to move them over to development since they're the most public face of the school right now and there's no season? Like, I wonder about that part in terms of a mind of an athletic director.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really would vary from coach's contract to coach's contract. So depending on the clauses in the contract, it could range from act of God, such as this, where it says that the coach will be at a reduced salary, or if there are no games, they won't be paid, or it's deferred compensation, to there's nothing in the contract and they got to pay the coach whether we're playing or not. So it really varies because there's not a standard contract that every coach is in agreement with the university.
Okay, one last thing I thought about. So if you're an athletics director and think if you were back at Boston College, Miami, Ohio, if you're sitting in a chair, are you sleeping? Do you have a list of bullet points that are constantly on loop in your brain? Like, I imagine these leaders, men and women who are in the chair, are leaning heavily on their senior leadership, leaning heavily on everybody providing information so they can make decisions. Like, is this a no sleep situation? Talk to me about the well-being of some of these ADs and the health, and what are they doing? Like, how do they even manage this type of situation?
Yeah, in some ways, it's giving balance to their lives because they're home with their families, and it's probably been a very positive thing for a lot of them. At the same time, I know them all well enough, or not all of them, obviously, but many of them. They're fully engaged in what's going on and what they're trying to do, and they're constantly communicating with their staff, their student athletes, political leaders, their medical staff at the campuses. They're visiting with their presidents, their CFOs. They're checking in with professional sport organizations to see what they're thinking and what they're doing. And so the leaders that are really strong leaders are perpetually connecting with their key stakeholders and making sure that everyone's in alignment, reassuring them, telling them in realistic terms and frank terms what the context is and what they're anticipating. So everyone is comforted at least by those connections.
Yeah, it's ironic, something you just said, right? You know, you talk about working in sports is a heavy, the work-life balance sometimes is tilted towards work in terms of what you do, and especially as you get more responsibility. But here in this time when athletic directors are probably challenged to make some of the toughest decisions they will or have probably had to make, they're at home with their family in making those decisions. I think that's very ironic and probably does, like you said, provide some type of balance.
Yeah, I'll tell you the one of the things that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is right now the world is learning to live without sports. We need to keep our stakeholders engaged and be prepared to recruit them back, because people are learning how to live a quality life without sports right now, and may not, especially in an unstable economy, may not be as willing to buy tickets or provide donations to a university. They're discovering other interests and passions during this time, and I don't think we can take that lightly.
All right, that opens up a whole another layer of concern, right? That's very true.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Brad, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you giving me some insight. Hopefully our listeners got some insight and joining us here on the One Question Leadership podcast.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That was Brad Bates. He's the Vice President for Consulting at Collegiate Sports Associates. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.